footsteps, so that we too can be the hands and feet of Christ in this world. So we ask that you open our hearts and minds this day and help us to listen to your message. Through your humble servant we pray. Amen. So I shared just last week that we did hear in the Gospel of John, Jesus telling the disciples when they had questions, and when the people that he was calling to be disciples, they were asking him questions, and he said, "Come and see." Well, now this week when we hear it in the Gospel of Matthew, when he's calling these fishermen, he says, "Follow me." So not only do we come and see, but Jesus is asking us to follow. And this is the beginning of Jesus' ministry. This is the beginning of when Jesus is calling people to follow him, so that he can teach others about the love of God and what God is truly all about. And so he's going to begin his ministry. He's going to teach them about the Torah. He's going to teach them about taking care of one another, reaching out with compassion and grace. And he's going to heal people along the way. And so it's a journey that these disciples, these new-found disciples, are beginning also with Jesus. They're going to be on an adventure, an unknown journey, because they have no idea what Jesus is going to be doing. They left their nets behind, and guess what? They're following Jesus, but they don't know everything that is to come. And so when we answer this call, like I answered a call to ministry, when we answer a call, we don't always know where it's going to be. It is a journey. It's a journey of our faith, but it also can be an adventure. And sometimes the adventure is awesome, and sometimes it's like very challenging. All you have to do is remember Job, who was on a boat. Not Job, Noah. Sorry, not Noah. What's the one? Help me. Jonah! Thank you. Didn't have enough caffeine this morning. So Jonah, had gotten on a boat. He went the opposite way of what God was calling him to do, and he gets thrown into the sea. So we know sometimes the adventure can be treacherous at times. Now, one of the things I was talking about earlier this morning was when you're a kid, before we get using all our technology, and I know that happens earlier all the time, we used to have a lot of imagination, and we'd be on adventures, right? You'd be a pirate, you'd go search for buried treasure, or you'd be an astronaut, you'd be making a rocket and shooting off to go up to Mars or someplace to explore new places. Or maybe you just did some other cool, neat games that you created on your own. But we used to love being on an adventure. And so today I want to share a story with you. It's a story that is based on our book study that we're reading right now. It's called God's Smuggler, right here. And I believe, Francis, you still have a couple extra books?
Yes.
Okay. So I know some of you aren't able to attend the book study, but it doesn't mean you can't read the book. It's a great book. It's a great story. And I'm going to share a little bit of this with you in a few moments. But there are times when God calls us, and we have no idea why God would call us. And yet, we can, when we accept and when we put our trust, it can not only change us, but it can change so many other people, even if we don't know or understand it. So I want to share this because the disciples, when they left their nets behind, they really didn't know what Jesus was going to do with them. They really were just changing their lives. And their lives were going to be forever changed after they left those nets behind. So I want to share a little bit about this story, God's Smuggler, and I want to give you a little background of this person. His name is Brother Andrew, and this is a real true story. He is still alive today, but he was born like in the 1930s, but he was too young to fight in World War II. He grew up in Holland, and he was a rascal in many ways, but he loved he always wanted a big adventure. He always wanted to do something really cool. So he was a little bit mischievous with the German soldiers. There was a couple things that he did. First thing that he did was he found out that if he got some fireworks, he used to throw them at the German soldiers. And they never saw him, they could never catch him. So these sparks would fly, they had no idea what was happening. He also would take sugar you put it in the gas tanks of the German gas, tanks, because then they wouldn't run. So he had this talent for subterfuge and undercover work. This is something that he seemed to really enjoy. The other thing he did is his family was Protestant. People in Holland, in his town of Whit, were either Protestants or Catholic. And they had to walk all the way across town in their little village to go to the Protestant church. So he had a way of sneaking out of church during the service. Now I know none of you are going to do that, right? You're all going to stay right here as I'm sharing this story. I've got people watching the back just in case. Andrew, as a young boy, he had a large family, and the family would walk across the village into the church, and they would always sit up front. But see, Andrew kind of would lag a little bit behind, and the reason why he did that is because there was never enough room in the front pew for all of them to fit. So what did he do? He would say, I'll just sit in the back, and then I'll meet you after church, So he would sit in the back of the church by an exit. And as soon as the service really got going, he would sneak out. And he'd just go outside and have a good time. But he would get back just in time to, when the service was over, to be around people who were commenting and critiquing the sermon. Okay, so he had enough so that he could greet the pastor. And then when they went home for their Sunday dinner, he could have a conversation with his family about the sermon and the service. And his family never caught on. Nobody did. But he did confess it in the book here. So now we know. So that's what he used to do growing up. And then when he was old enough, he really wanted to be on an adventure. He wanted to leave his hometown. So he joined the army. And when he joined the army, he was not a good boy. Okay? He was a good young man. He partied, he smoked, he drank. He did all sorts of crazy things. And even as they were fighting in Indonesia, instead of wearing his helmet, he wore this yellow straw hat. And he just dared anybody to shoot him. He got really kind of like wild and crazy. But the one thing he had, which he put in the bottom of his rucksack, and he never looked at, was his mother's Bible. She asked him to take it with him. So of course he's not going to say no to his mom. So he took the Bible and put it at the bottom of his rucksack. And he never looked at it the whole time he was fighting. But he did get injured. And his ankle got messed up, got shot up. So now he's in the hospital. He's not going to fight anymore because he can barely walk that well at the beginning. And somehow he starts reading his mother's Bible. Do you guys think some kind of change might happen with him? Well, yes. He started reading the Bible. There were nuns that were running the hospital and would talk to him and everything and kind of keep coaching him to do that. And so when he finally came home, he realized that he now wanted to go to church. And he started not only going to church, but he went to more than one worship service every week. And his girlfriend at the time thought, well, okay, but she was a little worried that he might become too much of what we would call a Jesus freak. But he started embracing the Bible and embracing the teachings of Jesus and wanted to know more. And so he and a friend of his found out about this missionary college in Scotland. Now, he had to learn how to speak English. Andrew wasn't educated. He never had finished school. So he had a little bit of difficulty at first. And he was all set to go. He had to raise some money to pay for the first term. And he had people supporting him. If you read the book, you'll find out all of these different people support him. But he winds up getting enough money for the first term, and he's all set. And he gets a cable saying, we don't have a bed for you right now. You'll have to wait till the next term. But Andrew believes he's still supposed to go. So he goes to London. And he can't go up to Scotland yet because they don't have room for him. But the office that's there in London takes care of him and does all sorts of odd jobs. And he meets some people that take him in until they have an opening. And he works and gets some money so that he can go to this missionary college. So he's going to become a missionary. And in this missionary school, they learn about the Bible, and they learn theology, in the first half of the day. In the second half of the day, they learn practical things. They learn how to build shelters. They learn how to take a car apart and then put it back together. Because as a missionary, you never know where you're going to go, where you need to have some tools of some practical things. So a friend of his, who was a year ahead of him, winds up in Korea. And the college, the missionary school asked him if he wanted to go there. But he had a chance to go back to his hometown in Holland. And he got invited to go beyond the Iron Curtain. This is the 1950s, okay? So you have all those communist countries behind the Iron Curtain. And so he goes to one of these countries, goes to Yugoslavia. And he is on this guided tour so that they can see how well the communism works. But what does Andrew do? Remember, I told you he's really good at undercover work and subterfuge. He sneaks off all the time, and he goes and finds Christians and goes to church in Yugoslavia. And he finds a little Bible shop. And so he wants to reach out, and so he would speak in these different churches. And they were so glad to see him. They were so impressed that somebody from the West could come across and talk to them, because it was very hard for them to worship in a lot of these communist countries. So when he came back to Holland, he had a mindset of trying to go back over there and bring some more pamphlets and everything about Christ. And eventually what happens is there's a group that had been praying with him and praying for him. They told him, you need to learn how to drive. And he's like, I don't have a car. Why do I need to learn how to drive? So he gets a driver's license. He calls his family up that had moved from his hometown to Amsterdam. And they have to have a blue VW, Volkswagen. And they said, we believe that you're supposed to have, you got to come to Amsterdam and get the keys. So now all of a sudden he has a car. He goes back to his hometown. They think he's now rich, so a lot of people stop giving him money. But he still follows this, and he keeps applying to go over, to get a visa to go to Yugoslavia in these communist countries. And at first, he keeps getting turned down because he says he's a missionary. Finally, he prays about it to God, and God said God tells him, you're there to teach and preach. And he says, teach. So he puts down teacher in the occupation. The visa gets approved, and now the story continues. And this is what I want to share with you. But before all that happened, when he was in the missionary school, when they were just about ready to go out on their own, they were sent in small groups around Scotland, different places, and they were given essentially no money, and they had to go for a couple months, whatever it was, and start reaching out to people, trusting that God was going to provide for them. And you know what? God did. Every time they had to find a place to live, and the group that he was part of, they believed that no matter what was donated to them, food or money or clothing, 10% of it would always go back to God. So they tithed. And when they were all done with their time together, they had things left over, which they gave away. But they were in Scotland, they were doing a session with some people, and they said, we want to invite you to tea tomorrow afternoon. Well, they invite them to tea, but guess what? They had no money to buy any of the food. They had no tea, okay? And here they're inviting a group of people for tea. But the neat thing was this group of people said, well, I have some tea, I have some biscuits, what we call it, the tea biscuits, what we think of cookies. I have some of those. People started to bring things together. But apparently when you have tea over there, you're supposed to have a cake. Well, where were they going to get a cake? None of them had a cake. None of them had money for a cake. And so the next day, the tea was supposed to start at 4 o'clock. They're praying and praying, they're waiting and waiting, and figuring out, well, the tea's going to be a failure because we still don't have a cake. 3:30 that afternoon, all of a sudden, the people that he had stayed with in London had sent him a package, and it was a chocolate cake. And they said, we just felt that we need to send you a cake, and it arrived just in time before the tea. See, God provided. It was amazing. So now we jump forward a little bit, And we get to a point where Brother Andrew is smuggling pamphlets. He's taking Bibles and some pamphlets throughout Yugoslavia. And he'd already visited a lot of rural towns, and now he's going to visit a little bit larger community. So I want to tell you a little about, read this to you. It's a couple of pages. It's a great story. So now he's in Yugoslavia. This is what happens. The roads in Yugoslavia were extraordinarily hard on cars. When we weren't climbing fierce mountain trails, we were fording streams at the bottom of steep valleys. But the worst threat to the little Volkswagen was the dust. Dust lay over the unpaved roads like a shroud. It sifted in on us even through the closed windows. And I hate to think what it was doing to the engine. Every morning in our quiet time, Nicola, who was a translator that went with him, and I would include a prayer for the car. Lord, we don't have either time or the money for repairs on the car, so will you please keep it running? One of the peculiarities of travel in Yugoslavia in 1957 was the friendly road stoppings that took place. Cars, especially foreign cars, were still such a rarity that when two drivers passed each other, they almost always stopped to exchange a few words about road conditions, weather, gasoline, supplies, and bridges. One day we were dusting along a mountain road when up ahead we spotted a small truck coming toward us. As it pulled alongside, we also stopped. "Hello," said the driver. "I believe I know who you are. You're the Dutch missionary who's going to preach in Turna tonight." "That's right," said Brother Andrew. "And this is the miracle car?" "The miracle car? I mean the car that you pray for each morning." I had to laugh. I had mentioned the prayer in a previous meeting, and the word had obviously gone on ahead. Yes, I admitted, this is the car. "Mind if I take a look at her? I'm a mechanic." "I'd appreciate it," said Brother Andrew. I had put gasoline in that engine, and that was literally all since I had crossed the border. So the mechanic went around to the rear and lifted the hood. Remember the motor in the VWs are, in the rear of the car. For a long time, he stood there just staring, this mechanic did. He said, "Brother Andrew, I have just become a believer. It is mechanically impossible for this engine to run. Look, the air filter, the carburetor, the sparks. No, I'm sorry, this car cannot run. And yet it's taken us thousands of miles." So the mechanic only shook his head. He said, "Brother, would you permit me to clean your engine for you and give you a change of oil? It hurts me to see you abuse a miracle." So gratefully, we followed the man to his village a few miles from Turna. We pulled behind him into a little courtyard filled with pigs and geese. That night, while we preached, he took the engine apart, cleaned it piece by piece, changed the oil, and by the time we were ready to leave the next morning, presented us with a grinning new automobile. God had answered our prayer. We drove into Belgrade on the 1st of May 1957, May Day, the high holy day of communism. There wasn't a better seat in a restaurant to be found in the entire city. Nicola and I would have slept in the car that night if the pastor of the church at which we were to speak had not taken us into his own home. And it was in this church that we had the experience that has shaped my ministry down to the present moment. Nicola and I stood on the platform facing a crowded room. It was so full that we did not even have room to put up the flannel graph with which I illustrated my stories of the Gospels. See, they even had flannel boards back then, the little flannel characters that you put on things. Anyway, he said that, and then halfway through the service, someone started hammering. The next thing we knew, they had taken a door right off its hinges so that an overflow crowd in the choir room could hear. These were not the solemn-eyed country people I'd come to love, but a sophisticated, fairly well-dressed city congregation. Well, after the talk, Nicola and I gave an altar call. We asked that everyone who wanted to commit their life to Christ or who wanted to reaffirm a previous commitment raise their hand. Every hand in the room went up. Every single hand. Surely they hadn't understood. Brother Andrew explained again how serious a step this was, and he made the conditions of discipleship under a hostile government painfully clear. And then he made a second appeal. This time he asked the people to stand. The entire congregation stood. He was astonished. I had never seen such readiness. Carried away by their spirit, I launched into an enthusiastic description of the daily disciplines of prayer and Bible reading that turn newborn children into Christ, into mature soldiers in his ranks. I was outlining the plan for Bible study that we'd been taught at the Missionary Training College when I noticed a change had come over the rooms. For the first time, people in this responsive congregation were not meeting my eye. They were looking at their hands, the pew bags, anywhere but at me. So puzzled, I turned at the pastor. He too seemed embarrassed as he told me through Nicola, "Prayer, yes, that we can do each day. I like what you said about this, but Bible reading? Brother Andrew, most of these people do not have Bibles. And how many Bibles do we have in our pews sitting right here in front of us?" Brother Andrew stared at him in disbelief. He'd gotten used to the idea of rural churches, but in educated, cosmopolitan Belgrade? I turned to the congregation. "How many of you own Bibles?" I asked. In the entire room, 7 hands, including the pastor's, went up. I was stunned. I had long ago passed out the ones I brought with me. Now, what was I to leave with these people, so eager to learn, so needful of guidance in the hard walk that they had chosen for themselves, against the millions who were marching the other way? With the pastor, we worked out a system of Bible sharing, a schedule of group study combined with individual use, so many hours on such and such a day for each member. But that same evening, a resolve was born in me, a resolve that has burned brighter with each passing year. That night I promised God that as often as I could lay my hands on a Bible, I would bring it to these children of his behind the wall that men had built. How I would buy the Bibles, how I would get them in, I didn't know. I only knew that I would bring them here to Yugoslavia and to Czechoslovakia and to every other country where God opened the door long enough for me to slip through. This is what Brother Andrew has done his entire life. And he didn't do anything special for smuggling the Bibles, but that's why it's called God's smuggler. Because he was, every time he could, he would smuggle Bibles, get them translated in their languages, and he'd just pack them with his clothes and everything else. And every time he got to a border, he would just pray that the guards wouldn't take them away. And God would let him go through. And he'd bring Bibles to all these people. And then after 9/11, Brother Andrew started going to the Middle East and visiting all those hidden secret believers, the Christians in the Middle East, in Muslim countries. And he would try and bring Bibles to them, try to help them find Christ and worship Christ. It's an incredible adventure. He wanted an adventure all his life. The army was not the adventure he thought. And he was not the nicest guy in the world either while he was growing up or when he was in the army. But God had a purpose for him. And, Andrew answered that call. And he's answered it all his life. Now, I'm not saying all of us are going to have the same kind of adventure. But what God is saying to us, I'm calling you. I'm calling you to follow in Jesus' footsteps. I'm calling you to share that love that I freely want to offer people, to give the hope, the grace, the compassion. We have been blessed in so many ways. And all I'm asking you is if God knocks on your door or calls you, are you willing to leave your nets behind and go and follow him?